Single responsibility principle is the first solid principle. It states that a class should have only a single responsibility, one single purpose. This principle is not limited to classes. It's also applicable for entire software modules. Another definition states that each software module should have one and only one reason to change. These definitions are very similar, and the goal is to gather together the things that change for the same reasons and separate those things that change for different reasons. Let me give you an example. There is a class employee that has three fields: first name, last name, email, and we have getters for those fields. There is one more method: is email valid? This method checks if the email matches a certain format, and if it does, we consider the email to be valid. This method violates the single responsibility principle. This class, the employee class, is responsible for the employee information, the first name, the last name, and the email, and it shouldn't be responsible for the email validation. Let's have a look at the same example, but this time the email validation is extracted in a separate class. This class, the email validator, is only responsible for the email validation, and the employee class is responsible only for the employee information, the first name, the last name, and the email. This example follows the single responsibility principle, and there are a lot of benefits. The first one is simplicity. The code is simple, clean, and easier to understand. You don't have to browse through all the classes to find the email validation logic. There is a separate class which is responsible for just that. Also, the single responsibility principle increases the maintainability of your code. For example, if you want to make changes in the email validation process, for example, you want to consider only certain emails to be valid, or you found an email validation library on the internet which you can reuse. In this case, you just change the code in this class and you don't have to make any further changes in the other classes of your application. And finally, if a class is responsible for one thing, it's easy to reuse it. Our email validator class can be used anywhere in our application. Let's talk about history. Single responsibility principle is not a concept that suddenly appeared out of nowhere. It's something that has been discussed and researched for years. For example, there is a paper from 1972 entitled "On the Criteria to be Used in Decomposing Systems into Models." But I believe the first definition of this principle was made by Bertrand Meyer in his book Object-Oriented Software Construction. By the way, this book is considered to be one of the foundations of the object-oriented programming. The first edition was published in 1988 and the second expanded edition was published in 1997. In his book, he introduces the single choice principle. This principle states that whenever a software system must support a set of alternatives, one and only one module in the system should know their exhaustive list. And finally, later in 2002, the person who introduced the single responsibility principle the way we know it today is Robert Martin. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if I have to summarize the single responsibility principle in one sentence, it's do one thing and do it well.